Hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here to talk about a revolution in open source. But first, I'd like to go back in time a little bit and talk about Homebrew. Who here uses or knows Homebrew? Well, Homebrew is the missing package manager for macOS. And about a decade and a half ago, I created it. At the time, I was a bit of an open source person. And I was working at a Web 2 startup that used a lot of open source software. But it was a pain. This was a while ago. And all the different build systems, all the different technologies, packaging it up, it just wasn't very good. And I used to complain about this incessantly. I used to be known as Moaning Max. One of my friends got fed up with it one day and told me to do something about it. And that night I went home and started hacking on Homebrew. A few months later, I realized that it was actually a pretty neat thing. So I thought, why don't I open source it? This is a video showing how the open source contributions for Homebrew worked. At first, it was just me zipping around. After a few months, I managed to grab some attention from other people. It was pretty hard. Adam Vandenberg turned up, and I still owe him a lot. And then I managed to get some more attention. And then suddenly, it exploded. Homebrew is one of the biggest open source projects of all time. It has the most unique contributors of any open source project ever. Currently, we estimate it's probably got 40 to 50 million users. It's become this indispensable tool. Part of the reason it's so big is I developed this community. I understood that open source only succeeds if you get other people interested in using it. It's not though I didn't get some rewards over time for working on Homebrew. Square sent me this iPad once, a very generous gift, honestly. But it was an iPad, and this was Square. And Square were using Homebrew everywhere to make their fortunes. Google once sent me a blanket. And honestly, it wasn't that bad a gift because I could barely afford heat. The thing is, what I needed, and what everyone who works on open source projects have become passionate projects, that become things that they need, that the world needs, that become labor of love, is to pay the bills. I know you're thinking this isn't a portrait of me, but this expression was exactly how it was. 6 months into Homebrew, thousands of people using it, I quit my job to work on Homebrew full time. It was something I really wanted to work on. Honestly, it was the biggest thing I'd ever made, and people really loved it. I had a bit of money saved up, but in 6 months, I didn't have any money saved up. I still remember going to the bank and asking them what happens when I go overdrawn. And they were like, well, you just go overdrawn and you pay interest on it. I was like, interest? So I found another job. And this became a pattern for me, where I would work on Homebrew full time, saving up a bit of money, and then I would quit to work on Homebrew again, which is what I really wanted to be working on. We call this, at T, the Nebraska problem, based on this famous XKCD comic. It represents all open source software, which nowadays is 95% of all software. Everything is built on top of these open source foundations. Every Web 2 company that has made a fortune has made a fortune on the back of open source. And this comic represents it as being this tower that's flaky, that there's bits that are being maintained by people you've never heard of in their free time, but if those components unstabilize, what's going to happen to the internet? What's going to happen to all the software we use? And this kind of thing happens. About a year ago, there was a famous exploit in this open source package called Log4j. It turned out that this thing's everywhere. And all these enterprise companies suddenly discovered that they had a massive root exploit in their systems. And they emailed the maintainers of this project saying, hey, can you fix this? We're paying you money. But they weren't paying them money. This is open source. They assume they have a contract or something like that with these people. But no, they don't. So the log4j maintainers said, look, this is an open source project. We received no funding. We'll fix the bug. But maybe you could, help us out with some funding after this is all over. So they fixed the bug. All the enterprise companies downloaded the patch. And this project still is unfunded. More recently, a package called core.js, which is the base of pretty much every Node application that exists, had a massive the maintainer quit. 9 billion downloads this package has had. 10 to 15 million a week. It's the base of everything on the internet, and he quit. He said, I can't do this anymore. I'm not getting paid. This is a full-time job. If you're passionate about your open source project, you end up with 2 full-time jobs. I used to work full-time on my contracts, and then in the evenings and weekends, I didn't go out, I didn't have fun. Well, I enjoyed working on Homebrew. It's difficult. So for years, I've wondered how this can be solved. Lots of people have tried, and lots of people have failed. I had a Patreon for a bit, and I managed to get up to about $400 a month. My rent was $2,000, so that was no good. While looking at this about 18 months ago, I was in between projects. I started looking into Web3. Because I'm like most of you, and I'm a little suspicious of crypto. It seems to be mostly scams and JPEGs of animals. But it turns out, underneath it all, there's some interesting technology. And maybe we can apply it to fix a fundamental problem. The Nebraska problem. So I talked to some friends, and I founded T. T is Homebrew 2. It's Brew 2. I stopped working full-time on Homebrew probably 2015, 2016 or so. I was burned out. I'd done so many hours on it. But a community had evolved, and they were maintaining a lot of the project for me. I also felt it was mostly done. But in the years since, I realized it wasn't done, and there's millions of things that can be done at the package manager layer. But one of those things that we want to do is remunerate open source by putting the package registry on chain. We want to create an economy backed by code. Open source is worth billions, probably more. All those trillion-dollar companies that have built software enterprises, they're backed by a huge amount of open source that they barely contribute to. We plan to do it with a token. You'll stake against the open source that you consider to have value. In reward for that stake, we will give you a percentage in the epoch, a reward, much like when you get interest from a bank. And part of that reward will flow into the dependency graph for open source. I was saying, so much of this essential open source code is deep in the stack. You don't know about it, but you're using it. Whenever you type node, there's hundreds of packages underneath that, most of them unfunded. So a certain percentage flows all the way down, funding the entire ecosystem. In order to get there, we've made a package manager, a new package manager, Brew 2. tcli, the command line interface. I released this last November, and so far it's a wild success. You should try it out if you use Brew. Part of the things I love about what it is, apart from the fact that it's smooth and fast, it's more secure, it's just better in every way that I could think of. I really have invested everything I could think of after Brew into a new version. Part of the things I like is magic. With other package managers, you have to think about using the package manager. You have to install things, you have to manage things, you have to uninstall things. With T, you just type in what you want and it installs it magically. This works inside scripts, it works inside VS Code, it works everywhere. You don't have to think about the package management part. Also, tcli is fast. Here we're running a Hello World example with Brew and T. T gets done in under 10 seconds. Brew keeps going for another 40. I don't want you to be thinking or waiting on my tooling. I believe it's important the developer experience is as delightful as possible. And we released an app. I'm really excited about this app because I think that open source is a treasure trove of neat and cool tools that nobody's been using. Nobody's using them because typically you go to the browser first. We're making it so all these tools can go to an app store-like experience first. With TGUI, if you want to use the new Stable Diffusion web UI, you just open up TGUI, click install, and then open it. There's 3-hour tutorials online for how to use this product. It's the best way to generate images at the current time because of all these things. And we released this today. This morning, you can go to Product Hunt and show your support, as they like us to phrase it, and download it onto your Mac. TCLI is cross-platform, Linux and Mac, and Windows coming later this year. Currently, we're releasing the GUI for Mac first. I'm really excited about the possibilities because, for example, with the new AI tools that are coming out, most of them are web-based and they require you to pay OpenAI a bunch of money. But there's a bunch of AI models that are open source. I really believe in open source and what is possible when a community gets together. With TGUI, it is much easier to consume these models and build apps on top of them, thus making a true open source AI solution. So thank you for listening today, and I hope that you believe, like I do, that we're creating a revolution in how open source is built and funded. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you.
Hello, guys. So, first of all, congratulations for your talk.
Thank you.
I'd like to start asking you about the intersection between Web 2 and 3 and the bridges. How will it impact the open source environment?
So there's a lot more to Web3, in my opinion, than the blockchain part. I didn't know this until I looked into it more carefully, but it's also about decentralization, immutability, security. So I'm very excited about what Web3 has to offer. Now there's skepticism, and I see T as being one of the tools that can really bring Web2 developers and Web2 users over to the Web3 component. Our GUI later this year will have a wallet built into it, and it will just be an easy onboarding experience into supporting open source.
And what do you think will be the key challenges to implement the protocol?
The key challenges for the protocol?
Yes.
Well, it's always a matter of mind share, and Web3 in crypto has bad rap. It really does. I didn't expect myself to be working in it. As long as you can convince people that it's trustworthy, then that's the biggest barrier to usage of the protocol. Building the protocol isn't actually that difficult. It's mostly a design process. You spend 12 months designing it, but making sure that it can't be gamed. That's the big issue. But you're creating an economic system, and you need to make sure that the people who participate in that don't find ways to extract money out of it. That's part of the reason Web3 has such a bad rap, right? It's so difficult to get that right. It's so difficult to make sure that these technologies you're building don't have scams, don't have easy ways for people to scam people built in. Building out that trust is part of the problem we've had in building these new economic systems, because they really are new economic systems that cross boundaries, that are global, that are accessible to everybody, that aren't gate-kept by government and banks.
You know, we at MIT Technology Review, we use a framework that comes from the Center for Collective Intelligence, from the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, which is based in love, money, and glory. This is the basis of engagement for us. Everyone is engagement in something. If that something gives love, money, or glory, or a combination of these variables. How do you think this concept can be related to TE? And how do you think is it possible to engage people on the environment, on the open source environment, of course, but specifically with T?
Yeah, so open source has always had two of those things. It's had love. Really, a lot of these open source projects are labors of love. They start as a need that someone has, and then they persevere despite the time cost, despite how much energy it takes, despite how ungrateful a lot of people are about open source because of love. And a lot of people gain glory, like I gain glory from Homebrew for sure. It's very rare I go to a developer conference nowadays without meeting several people who like are kind of hero worshipping me to a certain extent, which I don't exactly like. I rarely tell people about Homebrew. I let them discover it organically, and yeah. So the glory is there, provided you make something that's that important, but the money's not there. And it's caused all these problems for people who work in open source, who care about open source, who want to work on open source full time. With T, we're hoping we fix that. I really want it to be so that people who work at Web 2 companies can quit to work on these open source projects that they've been maintaining a little bit in their spare time, or they've just had ideas for. They know how to insert this important technology into the stack. They just have no real way to make that their job. And what we want is for it to be our job. This is stuff we care about, we deeply care about, but people have tried and people have failed. We think T's innovative new system has a good chance.
When you think on the long term, what do you think it's going to be the main goals for T? First, globally, and after that, we'll discuss about Brazil.
So, well, open source is global to start with. Crypto is global, open source is global. People from all over the world contributed to Brew and the other projects that I've made over the years. It has no barriers. Sorry, what was the question?
Long-term plans.
Yes. So the long-term plan for T is to make it so that the key parts of open source that we cannot afford for them to fail have a legitimate way to fund themselves. Once we've achieved that, I will feel like I'm going to heaven, everyone's good, the future is secured. Longer term than that, then I feel that the T token's value should represent the value of all open source. T, the company, is not making any money out of the token. We're not taking a percentage of transactions that occur on the CryptoNet chain. I want it to have the value of open source so that it can support open source. Once we launch the blockchain, it's going off into the nether, an autonomous system that we cannot control, apart from through a DAO. And the DAO will have governance, and the governance will be decided by the open source projects it's supporting, and not by us.
And specifically about telling about Brazil, we have an audience full of entrepreneurs and programmers, developers of all kinds. What do you think of the quick wins for these audience and for these entrepreneurs here in Brazil?
Well, a lot of open source is maintained by people who live in the United States or Europe, and that's partly because it's easier there to fund that. I feel that what's important for open source is that everyone anywhere who has an idea that can contribute to this glorious thing we've built called the internet and keep it running and keeping it advancing can do so. And I really hope that the T protocol will enable that.
What do you see as the main differences between those regions? You guys have more usage in Europe and the United States, and now entering and looking for the market in Latin America and in Brazil. Is it possible to define differences between those regions regarding entrepreneurs and developers in general?
I feel open source truly is something that anyone can participate in as long as they have a computer. So the barriers really are just a matter of making sure that they can continue to work on that open source that they've made that has so much value for the world.
Yes, but when we see the whole market in Brazil, we see that things are more mature now, but we still don't have the same amount, for example, of investments. Those rounds of investments are different. Even with the devaluation of Rio, how do you think everything is going to be linked, considering the variation of cryptocurrencies and the system of payments that you are establishing at T? How everything is going to be related, in your opinion?
Well, it's very important that we make sure that the T token has a stable valuation. And that will happen with time. Like crypto projects, they have a very speculative element initially, and that's just how it is in crypto. It's part of the reason that you can make a project that then gets to the sort of layer of grandeur that we're trying to do. So, sorry.
Yeah, the specific points for our markets, considering those variations of cryptocurrencies and the system of payment for the developers and the whole community. How do you think it will be possible to take advantage of these the whole environment for Brazilian entrepreneurs and developers?
Well, yeah, like I really want to think that what we're building is something that's accessible to everyone. Like you talked about how investment can be difficult to get here in Brazil. And you shouldn't need investment in order to make something that's fundamental infrastructure for the internet. With the T token, there will be DeFi built on top of our protocol, almost certainly. And people can build the kind of DeFi which makes it possible to bootstrap an idea, something that's important to open source, as well as the other aspects of DeFi that we're excited about that people will build that will sustain that token. I'm not permitted to talk about them by my CFO at this point.
Yeah, yesterday I was with Gabriel Vasquez, the partner of A16Z at the center stage, and we are talking about their strategies to Brazil, and they are going to look to Brazil in a different way. He promised that from August on, he'll spend most of his time here in Brazil looking for the markets. And is it possible to think about T with a specific roadmap, considering the markets, or how do you guys pretend or intend to address our markets here in Brazil?
Right. When the protocol goes live, which we're planning this year, it will not have any boundaries. You know, this isn't going to be US first or Europe first or anything like that. In fact, it might not be in the US at all, considering how regulation is going there right now. The most interest we've had has been from countries outside of the US and Europe. Like India is hugely interested in what we're doing. And I'd like to think that's because they see this as a possibility to contribute to open source, get in there and make something that's really important without the need to find investment first. I founded T with VC money, and I really didn't want to. I wanted to be able to build it without going there. I'm sorry to my investors, but, you know, thanks for the money, but actually I would have rather not had it. And I hope that T can make it so that you can make these kinds of companies without investment using the power of cryptocurrencies.
Max, thank you so much and good luck with T. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.